Assalamu alaikum, Muhammad. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. This is going to be something that's going to hopefully blow my mind, and I mean that in a good way. Something that I think a lot of people have questions about, and you reached out to me, I think over a month ago, really passionately kind of explaining the necessity to have this conversation. So I want to jump straight in with asking you your background in this field, because we've spoken and you mentioned that you're not like a psychologist or psychotherapist or anything like that, but that you're a subject expert in this area. So I want to know a little bit about your journey into this specific subject matter and how that came about.
Sure, thank you very much, Hasib. So, who am I? I'm a working professional with a strong educational background and a keen interest in psychology. Now, I've spent a fair bit of time with individuals that have been victims of narcissistic abuse. So, in some sense, I've had a first-hand experience with a malignant covert narcissist, or somebody which demonstrates the traits of narcissistic personality disorder. And what that has meant is I've developed quite a strong specialism in the topic, to the extent that it's reasonable to say I am a subject matter expert. And to demonstrate that, I have recently been educating mental health professionals in the field. Now, one of the recent calls was over a dozen of individuals which are mental health professionals, ranging from individuals with a PhD in psychology and to the upper end individuals which have 30, 40 years of experience as a certified psychotherapist and a psychiatrists. And even within that call, there was a lot of knowledge gaps with the attendees, and that's something which is frankly and sadly the norm on this topic. Very few mental health professionals understand deeply how to spot a narcissist, what a narcissist exhibits in terms of their behavior once they come across one, and it's often because there's a strong gap which is missing in terms of knowledge on this topic. So to provide a bit more detail on the extent to which I've researched this, it's been a theme that I've spent over a few years now deeply researching. I've cross-referenced this with a range of experts on narcissism, some US-based therapists, some UK-based ones as well. Read a plethora of books as well as articles and educational resources on the topic, with plenty of exposure to academic articles as well as more informative video format articles. So for myself, I found it incumbent on me to try to spread this awareness that I have on this topic, because of how profound it is and just how much of an impact it can make on people. So happy to kind of go ahead and start off with what's maybe more of a presentation style format, explaining the key themes of narcissism and psychopathy before we can dive in with Q&A and a more interactive session. How does that sound to you?
Yeah, sounds good. So I know you've been preparing this preparation. So you've been preparing this presentation for a while, and I believe it's a presentation similar to the ones that you've mentioned in the past that you've given and delivered to other mental health professionals. So let's do it. Bismillah. I'm all ears.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Hasib. So to start off, I'd like to just mention maybe three rough points, right? So one, why is it important to understand more about narcissism, right? And within that, there's 3 points. So generally, there's a lot of misunderstanding as to what a narcissist is. I think that's the most important thing. So one is misconceptions. Narcissism is seldom about an individual which is got a slightly inflated ego and likes to take lots of selfies. it's not so much to do with the excessive self-love and story of Narcissus in Greek mythology when we are referring to narcissistic personality disorder, or in other terms, pathological narcissism. So when in this call, or should we say this podcast, I will often refer to narcissists synonymously with psychopaths, and that's because really they are quite similar in how they operate, what they what the key characteristics are, and how it's identified within the field of psychology. An example of this is Sam Vaknin, who's an expert on the topic, often says there shouldn't really be a distinction between these different profiles. You should probably refer to them as cluster B personality types or dark triad personality types, right? So let's jump back into the misconceptions, right? When you think about narcissists, you think of people like taking lots of selfies, arrogant people, and or maybe serial killers if we're talking about psychopaths. So what's a more accurate understanding of psychopathy is that there's two sides of the spectrum. The violent side of them, the violent narcissists and the violent psychopaths, are the ones that become serial killers, right? That's one generalization, which is fair to say. The non-violent psychopaths or narcissists become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies. I mean, there are some stats and studies out there to suggest that 1 in 20 or even 1 in 5 leaders, CEOs of Fortune 500 companies are psychopathic in some way or form. And that's where this conversation, this podcast, has a much more interesting twist to it, because we really want to get rid of this misconception that narcissists or psychopaths are violent physically. If anything, it's probably more correct to say they are not violent rather than they are violent, if you wanted to generalize about them, right? So looking at the reality, right? In psychology, there are a range of personality disorders, and there's cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C, often known as mad, bad, and sad. The cluster B, being the bad, often referred to as dark triad, includes narcissism, which is really pathological narcissism and narcissistic personality disorder. Again, this is what we're referring to when we say narcissism. And psychopathy and Machiavellianism are some of the key traits within that cluster B personality group. The pathological narcissism we're talking about here is far more prevalent than we think it is, or even in terms of psychopathy. So we've heard statistics of 0.5 to 4% of people being narcissists or psychopaths, but I'll get into more detail on that. On paper, the DSM-4 mentions some of the key traits of a narcissist, which is pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, the requirements of excessive admiration, a strong lack of empathy, unwilling or unable to truly empathize and feel the feelings of others rather than understand them intellectually. The belief that they are unique, they should only be associated with high status people, institutions, and typically they're interpersonally exploitative. Now, this is the definition of a narcissist and or psychopath to some degree within the field of psychology, right? If you were to describe a number of people based on their characteristics, you might think that they could very much fit this profile, and that's ultimately the problem here, is that with a narcissist you can't typically identify them easily based on this criteria. These criteria allow for a medical health professional to diagnose them, but that's not what gives away a narcissist, but rather it's their behaviors. Right, that's where you can really start to tell if somebody is a narcissist, and that's what we'll get onto soon. And in many ways, the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for therapists to use psychotherapists to diagnose patients, right? It's not useful often because a therapist who isn't trained to spot narcissistic behaviors wouldn't be able to recognize what they are, right? So that's because they can put on a fantastic mask and demonstrate that they are exactly who their constituents or target individuals would like them to be, so they can put on a show for the therapist. And as much as individuals might like to think they'd be able to suss this out, no, you would not if you're dealing with a serious narcissist or psychopath. And ultimately what drives them is power, control, admiration. And combine that with a dangerous lack of empathy. That's what allows for, drastically exploitative individuals. And virtually all abuse, in many of the cases, is not physical. It's all psychological, right? So that's the realm which I'd like to explore in this podcast, which I find more interesting. To give some maybe popular references of which individuals have narcissistic traits or appear to be narcissists or psychopaths. I mean, more recently you've seen or may have seen a show called, my apologies, Tinder Swindler. That's a classic narcissist, and in this scenario, this person is not sophisticated at all. A true narcissist, which is more covert in their abuse, would not be as, frankly, silly or stupid enough to leave such traces of evidence as the Tinder Swindler has. That's a fantastic example of a non-sophisticated narcissist. Popular culture references House of Gucci. The Patrizia Reggiani is a classic, again, not super sophisticated narcissist, because it's quite evident that she acted in such a controlling way. And she, used physical violence to discard her victim, which is a member of the Gucci family. I think the House of Gucci example is quite interesting because, and this is typically the case, there's only, there's only two times that a narcissist will get diagnosed, and it's one, if it's court ordered, or two, if they decide to see a professional because of their issues, which they seldom do because they believe there is absolutely nothing wrong with them. And again, why it makes it so difficult to study them in the field of academia. And just a couple of other references. The Puppet Master, recently on Netflix, is another maybe better view on how a narcissist operates, better than Tinder Swindler, I would say. And looking at maybe movies, popular movies, I think Gone Girl is probably the best movie to demonstrate just how covert a narcissist truly can be, and how much they are able to get away with, frankly. And I would say, based on some of the anecdotes and stories I've heard of from victims, a movie like Gone Girl is frankly not unrealistic at all. Maybe if you remove the blood and the violence, which are effects of Hollywood, it's actually something very realistic. And frankly, there are probably millions of individuals around the world which are of a similar kind of character. So these are some of the popular references, right? There are others which are serial killers, the Ted Bundy, Anders Breivik, Charles Manson, ruthless dictators. Saddam Hussein demonstrated this. Other popular figures, you could say, ex-presidents of the US. There are a couple which demonstrate narcissistic and psychopathic traits, and many cult leaders or individuals in true crime stories that you often see on the TV. Again, many of those have clearly narcissistic traits. So before I continue, I'm just going to pause here and just clarify a bit more about one of these points, if that's okay. Sorry, one moment. Sure. So I think just to recap as to why I think it's important for the viewers to develop an understanding and awareness of this topic. One, these narcissists and psychopaths are dangerous, lifelong abusers. They do not change, unfortunately. Two, they're highly prevalent. And three, the sophisticated types are very stealth, difficult to trace. And so combined with the fourth factor of a misunderstanding of what narcissism is in the general population, even in the medical or mental health professional groups, I think it's it might just be the most important mental health issue of our times, I would say. In fact, more so than anxiety, depression, and other quite common mental health problems and difficulties people face. And part of that is because the likelihood of being affected by a narcissist or psychopath is quite high, actually. So Thomas Erickson speaks about this in his book, Surrounded by Psychopaths. And he says that, it's more likely to be affected by a psychopath than having a heart attack, or being diagnosed with cancer, or crashing your car, being robbed in a city on a Friday night, or getting sacked from your job. I think everyone who would be listening to this call right now knows at least a few people, right, which have had that happen to them, unfortunately. And that would suggest that there's more incidences of psychopaths impacting individuals than even those events occurred. So moving on to narcissists and prevalence, I think when we think of narcissists and or psychopaths, and now I'll jump to the kind of more psychopathic focus, Thomas Erickson, again, in his book Surrounded by Psychopaths, lays out that many of us would probably think that there are maybe 0.1% or 0.2% of people are psychopaths. And frankly, in his book, he clearly shows many of the latest studies demonstrate it's 2 to 4% of people, right, are psychopaths. Now that's up to 1 in 25 easily. Having said that, there are academics in the field which disagree and say that's too low. John Clark, who's written a couple of pieces on psychopaths and narcissists at work, has said that 6% of the male population are psychopaths and 2% of the female population are psychopaths. And more interestingly, Sigvard Ling, a Swedish psychologist, written several books, has said the figure has long been 4 to 5%, and in his most recent book, Everyday Psychopaths, it's actually higher than 5%. Now just take a second there and think. 1 in 20 people are psychopaths based on that statistic. And that really will make you question just how profound this topic is and can be. And to clarify the distinction between maybe psychopathy and narcissism, if we're being a bit relaxed about the definition, they are really, a psychopath is maybe just a worse version of a narcissist, somebody with NPD, lower empathy, more even lower, more inclined to exploit people interpersonally. So the statistics, the facts, the science is there. Psychopaths, you come across them probably every day if you're commuting. I know with COVID we're not commuting as much, but you come across psychopaths all the time, and you just wouldn't know that they are a psychopath. In fact, if you had a psychopath in mind, if somebody you knew was a psychopath, it's much more likely they're somebody you trust greatly, you think is fantastic and lovely. That's what you would think of a psychopath if you're dealing with a real one. But only a few individuals will typically know if they're dealing with a psychopath. And unfortunately, those are the individuals which are typically close to a psychopath or a narcissist. They invest heavily in their reputation, in how they're seen by others, and their psychological abuse and control and all of these negative behaviors are typically taken out on people close to them. And that's what is also quite worrisome. So I'll just touch upon what the different types of narcissists are. Again, we were using narcissists and psychopaths quite interchangeably. There are a range of different frameworks and ways to define narcissists. The classic simple one is what the layperson refers to as overt and covert narcissists. Now, the technical phrasing really is the grandiose or overt narcissist and the vulnerable or covert narcissist. Now, the grandiose type is much more obtuse, is in your face, is the center of attention. They're evidently there, and they're typically easier to spot. Whereas the vulnerable narcissist actually, ironically, has a bit of an awareness of the defense mechanism which they've created, which is this narcissism, which makes them actually more shy and reserved. But they're still, unfortunately, just as cold and brutal in how they take advantage of others. And so, those are the two types which are referred to very much so in academia. But what I'd like to focus on, which I find quite interesting, is overt abusers versus covert abusers. Now, as I use the phrase covert narcissist moving forward, this is actually in reference to covert abusers, not vulnerable narcissists as such. So this is where it gets really interesting, because identifying, recognizing, and being aware of an overt narcissist is difficult enough. It's a lot of psychological control, abuse, and behaviors which are very difficult for one to even recognize. But where it gets scary is the covert abusers. So, those who are aware of overt abuser narcissists may not even comprehend covert abusers. It's that much different. So Debbie Mirza writes a fantastic book on this. It's called The Covert Passive-Aggressive Narcissist, and it's possibly the best book on the topic of covert abusers, which are narcissists. So in this book, I'll lay out some of the key tenets, right? Covert abuse is incredibly stealth and sophisticated, and will typically be missed by mental health professionals, right? These covert abusers are most dangerous because of their ability to fly stealth, and they leverage their intelligence using a meticulous choice of words. Now, let's just clarify this. Words. That is how the abuse is carried out. Words. So, and we'll get onto the details of just how profound these impacts can be. Covert abusers are well-liked, charming, kind, appear humble and empathetic. And it's so insidious because the abuse is so hidden. Now, plausible deniability is the covert narcissist's greatest tool, because almost all of their abuse is carried out in a way where if you could never expose them, and even calling out one or two behaviors which might demonstrate covert abuse would just appear to be someone overthinking or being paranoid, right? Covert abusers mirror empathy and tears better than Hollywood actors. Hollywood actors have fame and money on the line, whereas a covert abuser has their whole life and existence on the line. And many of them, without exaggeration, can act better than Hollywood actors. It's common to be in a relationship with covert abusers for 10, 20, 30, 40 years and not even recognize that you are being abused. And if no one else sees it, even if you manage to see it, you wouldn't even think of talking to someone else about it, because it would seem so absurd. It would seem just so unusual. I mean, you'd be seen as overthinking or paranoid or crazy. And so going to a therapist will just re-traumatize you, frankly, unless they truly understand covert narcissists. And, what are the reasons for this? In higher education, only the overt type is taught. And even then, if we take a look at mental health professionals and understanding narcissism and psychopathy, undergraduate degrees may have a module or so on personality disorders. Within that, there's one of the three main clusters, embodies narcissism and psychopathy. And so you can graduate in psychology with having a very surface level understanding of what narcissism and psychopathy is. And even if you did study it academically in further education, it's very easy and possible for a narcissist to completely fool a therapist, unless they truly have had either experience with them or a strong specialism in the topic. I'll give an example. An anecdote taken from Debbie Mirza's book. There was a woman that was going to therapy for about a decade, 10 years, for anxiety and depression issues. And she would change therapist after therapist because nobody could help her. But one of the therapists she came across spent 15 minutes talking to her and told her, your mental health issues are a result of being with an abusive partner. And she actually got defensive. Like, what are you talking about? My partner's fantastic. They're lovely. They're great. And slowly but surely, the therapist unraveled how the victim had undergone lots of covert abuse. And it's untraceable, it's psychological, it's things that even if we were to understand it after this podcast, it still takes a long time to truly absorb and recognize it. And so this woman who's had 10 years of mental health issues, virtually all of it was a result of being in a relationship with an abusive person, and she had no clue. In fact, she'd probably be told that she's with one of the nicest people that anyone's ever met. They're lucky to be in that relationship. And the reason why that's the case is narcissists and psychopaths invest heavily in their external reputation. That's the most important thing for them. It's part of their narcissistic supply. So to give another example, there is a Holy Hell documentary about the Buddhafield cult where the head of the cult was a covert abuser or a narcissist. And he had followers which followed him for 20 years or so. Those followers were not stupid, probably as educated, if not more educated than someone on this podcast, because there were a lot of smart, kind, talented individuals who were simply convinced this covert abuser appeared to care. And 20 years in, they realized this person is actually just an abuser. And the whole thing is a mask and a facade. And I think one of the things I found very interesting in her book, Debbie Mercer's book, saying that after living with a covert narcissist for a long time, cult deprogramming would be more beneficial than therapy, because the effects of ending a relationship with a covert narcissist is similar to the effects of coming out of a cult. That's the extent to which abuse from a covert narcissist will impact you. And really, they're abusing you with words, subtle messaging, and compliments. And so, we must be aware of this topic, especially the covert abusers. And be cautious. Do not take a covert narcissist to therapy. They will use it as a training ground to spot the cracks in their mask and actually increase their likelihood to continue abusing. Some studies have shown. Covert abusers are master manipulators that could fool practically anyone, especially those who think they can spot people and understand people quite well. Do not be fooled by your social skills, regardless of your aptitude. If you're dealing with a narcissist or psychopath, it would be extremely unlikely for you to recognize them. So, focusing on the impact of narcissists now, at a high level, there are a few things. One is psychological, and that's the most important one, which is most profound. Individuals develop depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and that's almost a guarantee of dealing with a narcissist, or having a narcissist in your life close to you. You'd have your reality denied, and in fact, you'd feel like you're going crazy. This is a result of gaslighting. And on a worse side of the spectrum, many victims develop full-blown mental health issues. So PTSD or CPTSD are very typical of victims of narcissists, especially those that have been discarded by them. Dr. Romani, who's an expert on this topic, even posits the theory that people can develop OCD, a full-blown disorder, solely from being around and in a relationship with a narcissist. So many victims may very well be misdiagnosed with general mental health issues, which are really contextual. So it's contextual mental health issues. It's because of the context within you're in means that you've developed these mental health issues, this depression, anxiety, etc. So psychological impact is number one. Number two is the social impact. Narcissists, and especially psychopaths, will actively cut you off from all of your relationships until you have no bridges of support, and they implant enough paranoia and suspicion in yourself and those they can get to ensure that. Thirdly, physical. Narcs could always resort to physical violence. The less sophisticated types. The more sophisticated types ensure they are never behave in a way that could be traced. But without a doubt, they would have the same low empathy where murder would be on the table. That is a possibility. And a fourth, which is useful to reference, is financial, right? So narcissists and psychopaths will utilize finances and are often in the active pursuit of wealth and financial wealth, because that's the most tangible form of what we call narcissistic supply. So across the board, the impact is huge and all-encompassing. Now, we get to an important part of this discussion, which is the behaviors and tools of a narcissist or psychopath. Now, I'll run through a glossary of terms which are useful to reference. And this is where one can start to truly identify a narcissist or psychopath. And one should only do this in their own mind, in that they should not share this openly and easily with individuals unless they are aware of how narcissists operate and work. Because to share this topic with your average Joe or average friend, it will be too difficult for them to comprehend. And truly, the only people that would know a narcissist or psychopath are those who've experienced them. And that experience will teach you, once you've developed understanding of what narcissism and psychopathy is, if you start to recognize again and again, these behaviors, they keep coming up, and there's a pathological implementation of these behaviors, then you need to start paying attention, right? But otherwise, maybe everyone exhibits one or two of these traits every once in a while in their life. So what are the key behaviors or tools of a narcissist and psychopath? Let's look at behaviors. So there's two types I want to focus on. One is the three phases of a narcissistic relationship, or four, and two is the trauma triangle. Now, there are typically three phases, or four, of a narcissistic relationship. Phase one is love bombing or idealization. So in Tinder Swindler, this is the perfect example. Classic love bombing and idealization makes his victims feel like he's, the man of their dreams, does everything for them, is just an absurd fantasy where it encapsulates the victim to truly, think the world of them. And that's the most dangerous thing. So this is love bombing, or what's also called idealization, right? So if something feels too good to be true, pay attention, possible red flag, right? Once they've done that, now you have bought into the idea, like with first impressions, that they're a lovely, amazing person. So then phase two, devaluation. And slowly but surely, they will devalue you, chip away your confidence, use all of the tools like gaslighting, and others we'll discuss now, to destroy your self-esteem, destroy your confidence, make you a shadow of what you were, and ultimately victimize you. And that second phase of devaluation, it will continue for as long as the narcissist can possibly exert what you call or obtain narcissistic supply from you. And when either you have clocked on to what exactly they are, you are or exposing what they are, or you're not giving them what they want, it's phase three, the discard, right? That's when the narcissist or psychopath just gets rid of you, or tells you to bugger off, or cuts you off, etc. And those are the three phases of a narcissistic relationship. And the fourth, which makes it a full loop, is called hoovering. So after they've done this, and the discard is one of the most painful things an individual can experience in their life, because the narcissist ensures that they destroy the victim psychologically before they discard them. You have the hoovering. And hoovering is after they've done all this disgusting abuse, and typically at the point of discard, you either have no money or no friends or nothing to resort to, you're weak, you have nowhere to go. Because the narcissist sets you up in this way, they hoover you back in and say, whoa, okay, I apologize, and then they suck you back in, and they restart the 3 phases all over again. And unfortunately, many victims consistently throughout the relationships with the one narcissist, and at times with many people in their whole life, they reinvent this vicious circle, right? And typically victims become repeat victims because they're so normalized this behavior now. So those are the 3 phases of a narcissistic relationship. And I would like to reference now something called the drama triangle. The drama triangle represents 3 roles that the narcissist embodies in order to maintain control and power, their ultimate goal. So role number 1 of the drama triangle is to be the persecutor, somebody that essentially abuses you, that you are fearful of. And your fear is what gives them that feeling of power. That's 1. Second is the victim. So they act like the victim. And what happens then is you give them empathy, and your empathy again gives them power because you then do things on their behalf. You feel sorry for them, etc. Just like as you do things when you're fearful of someone. And the third is they are the hero. This is where it gets a bit more interesting, because the narcissist, in many instances, does superficially good things to gain your trust, but also so it appears though, wow, look how great this individual is. And frankly, they often create problems and solve them and appear to be the hero. And what that gives them is praise, which then again gives them their control and power over you. Let this be clear. It's narcissists and psychopaths often create problems, invent them, and then come out on top, being the heroes. So, point of information, if you see somebody who is a narcissist or psychopath, and they are often the hero in many situations, you could make the deduction each time they're a hero, or many of the times they're a hero, they may have just very well created that set of problems. So those are 2 of the key kind of frameworks for behaviors of a narcissist. Now I'd like to look at the tools. So number 1 is gaslighting. Gaslighting is the bread and butter of a narcissist or psychopath, right? We're talking about pathological level of gaslighting. Now, gaslighting is not maybe what others think of when they've heard of it on social media and so on, or that's maybe a mild version. Gaslighting comes from a show in the 1920s or 30s called Gaslight. It's about an abusive husband and his partner. So what happens is, back then, the light was powered by gas. So every time the wife goes out, the husband switches the gas light down or up. And when she comes back, she's confused. She asks, well, did you switch this down or what happened? It's not like it was yesterday. And the husband would just deny it's even happening. What are you talking about? Why are you overthinking this? I didn't, I didn't do anything. It's the same as yesterday. And that's one day in. So imagine one day in, she's probably spent the rest of the evening just thinking, oh my, am I going absurdly crazy? What's happening? I remember that it was definitely higher or brighter. And then day 2, he does the same thing, 3, 4. And slowly but surely, she absolutely loses her mind. And that's what gaslighting is denying someone's reality and making them doubt themselves so much that they very likely lose their sanity. That's true gaslighting. And this is the most powerful and kind of typical tool a narcissist or psychopath uses against their victims, which keeps these individuals in these abusive relationships for decades, because you don't know what reality is by that point. You don't trust yourself. You think you are overthinking things. Well, another sign of gaslighting. To give you an example of just how absurd, covert narcissist gaslighting can be, there's one anecdote of an individual called Mark who spent, frankly, 10, 20 years questioning his sanity just because he was being gaslighted, right? It's a hugely profound psychological tool. One other example is a woman who is being gaslighted for years actually made appointments with neurologists because she thought her brain was not working properly. So when we say these very small, subtle use of words and manipulation, it's not something small. It can actually drive you to a point where you go and get a scan of your brain because you think it's not working properly. That's how powerful gaslighting can be. And then you've got other tools. Flying monkeys is another fascinating tool that narcissists use. So flying monkeys essentially represent the narcissist, right? They're proxy narcissists, individuals that have been co-opted into the narrative of the narcissist and essentially brainwash them. And frankly, brainwashing is too soft a word to describe just what happens to flying monkeys. Flying monkeys, which is taken from Wizard of Oz, is that's where the reference comes from. And let's give some examples of this. The narcissist or psychopath will co-opt individuals which either have narcissistic traits or are highly empathetic, ironically, to build a case against the primary victim. So this is all happening, remember, before the victim is discarded in the phases. They needed to, because once you start to see through the cracks of what a narcissist or psychopath is, and they can't control you, they need to control how you are perceived by others. Because that way, if you build what's, say, an insanity case, then you can ensure no one believes what this victim says. And by the time that you have actually recognized what a narcissist or psychopath is, they've already destroyed all of your support networks to the extent that no one will believe a word you are saying because they've implemented such a level of suspicion and paranoia in people around you using triangulation and the flying monkeys. Flying monkeys are people who have been converted into weapons, and they will gaslight you by proxy. Their job is to smear your name to others, send you scathing emails, blaming you for everything, possibly testifying against you in court, sabotaging you, convincing others that you are crazy, actively working in a campaign to convince others that you are insane. And many of these individuals are victims themselves. They are unaware that they are doing this, but they've completely bought into the story that the charming psychopath or narcissist has manufactured. So gaslighting, flying monkeys, two key tools. Another one is triangulation. This is where narcissists, and this is how they operate often, narcissist psychopaths usually triangulate. So what we mean here is there's always a third party involved. They always bring in someone else. Classic example, if people are dating, for example, or going out with each other, they would, a narcissistic man might, throw very subtle messaging to suggest other women are far prettier than their partner is, right? That's a form of triangulation using a third party. Or, they create competition or rivalry between, say, siblings or colleagues at work. And so triangulation, it's often about manufacturing is the correct word, manufacturing rivalry, competition, paranoia, suspicion, right, in these victims. And so, that's the third key tool. A fourth one is referred to as baiting or reactive abuse. Now, what a narcissist or psychopath often does is they learn your emotions and your buttons. They learn what makes you happy, sad, angry, hungry, whatever it is. Narcissists and psychopaths understand your emotional state far better than you would. And they will use this data against you. One of the examples is reactive abuse or baiting. What this is narcissists and psychopaths will constantly trigger you in very subtle ways through messaging that only you can understand and others in public would not, in order to trigger you to behave badly or angrily or upset towards the narcissist in a way which then in public appears that you are the problem. You're the one with the anger problem. And this is where they turn around quite perfectly and say, well, look who's got the problem now. You're the one that's acting up, right? An interesting analogy is, if your friend just pokes you in the stomach every day, I mean, who cares? It's just a poke, right? It's a friendly poke. But imagine that individual does it for 365 days in a year. After a while, you're just going to be like, back off. Why are you poking me? And in front of others, people will just think, well, why are you getting emotional about it? He's just playing with you. He's being, your friend. He's poking at you. But this is, a funny analogy which kind of represents how reactive abuse works. So many other key phrases and tools which are important to learn, as we said, gaslighting, flying monkeys, triangulation, baiting, reactive abuse, and also smear campaign, which goes hand in hand with the flying monkeys and the discard. When the narcissist and psychopath tries to discard you, they use flying monkeys to smear your name. And they will build full-blown insanity cases and genuinely convert people into thinking that you have developed some insanity. And there are people living amongst us who have gone through this. I know many stories that are quite similar. And so there's a range of other glossary terms I'd recommend anyone interested or keen into understanding this. You're talking about intermittent reinforcement, scapegoating, mirroring, narcissistic supply, projection, hoovering, breadcrumbing, grey rocking, future faking, no contact, projection, as we said before. Now, if one was to suspect that they're in a relationship of this sort, right, education is the key way to move forward with this. And it's not scientific as such, but I would say if one watches, say, videos on all of these key glossary terms and sees these behaviors again and again and again, the degree to which you feel the similarities, right, and how profound these videos are in explaining the experiences you've had would demonstrate the degree to which you've probably been going through this. So the average person might watch a few of these videos and say, I think I see a couple of these behaviors with a couple of other individuals. That would demonstrate to me that they fortunately aren't dealing with someone who's, a very worrying narcissist or psychopath. But if you come across this stuff, read into it and watch the videos and give yourself time, be critical about your conclusions, take months off absorbing this information, but still these videos or these resources explain so well things that you just could never comprehend for years, then you're in the territory of maybe you are dealing with someone who's a narcissist or psychopath. So, I think a few key last points I'd say is in terms of do's and don'ts. So, number one, never expose a narcissist. This is the most dangerous thing you can do for your own sanity, for yourself and your safety. Do not expose a narcissist. Right? Do not go to them. Go to therapy with them. If you go to therapy with a narcissist or psychopath, the narcissist and psychopath will not only flip the therapist to make them believe you are the problem and again re-traumatize you, which is typically what would happen unless they specialize in narcissism and psychopathy. But it would also give the narcissist an opportunity to find out all of the behaviors that their victims have realized are wrong and mold them in a way where they cannot be identified in the future. It gives them the opportunity to hide themselves better. So those are two key, do not go to therapy with them, and do not expose a narcissist. What you should do, one, if you can, is go what we call no contact. As much as you can, cut away from them. And there are many, discussions around to what degree and how this can happen. But the mainstream answer is you should go no contact, detach from them as much as you can. If not, slowly retract yourself bit by bit from their lives if you truly identify one. What you also should do is find maybe one or two individuals that will truly empathize with your experience. And even if they don't believe you, they will listen to you and allow you to be heard. Validation is the key thing a victim needs, because this whole thing, quite frankly, does sound conspiratorial. So a victim is often sitting there thinking, how will anyone believe this? It's just so absurd. This is like the stuff that happens in movies. Turns out that stuff does actually happen in real life as well. So education. So on solutions, number one, education, really understand things. Two, validation. Get validation from either therapists who have experience in narcissistic abuse or friends that might do so. But be careful. Do not talk to people that will deny your reality. You need validation. Thirdly, boundaries. As much as you can, implement boundaries. And then fourthly, to some degree, no contact is one of the key solutions. So those are some of the key tenets or facets of this topic. I know it's been a presentation format, so thank you very much for listening. But Hasib, I'm happy to have a conversation around anything you found worth exploring or interesting. So I'll hand this over to you. Thank you, Hasib.
No, thank you, Mohammed, because that was a very, very detailed insight into the subject of narcissism and psychopaths. As we were talking, I was doing a little bit of reading, checking some of the references that you mentioned and stuff like that, but also just making some notes for some questions that I had. Obviously, it's going to take a while to process this conversation because it's very intense to think about the fact that, like you said, 1 in 20 people will have, 1 in 20 of us are narcissists / psychopaths, and the part that struck me the most was the conversation around the covert narcissist and the kind of abuse that kind of they dish out onto people that could be close to them. But whilst you were talking, like, there's obviously, some of these traits that you're mentioning that I guess, I would imagine that some people exhibit in isolation. And so the question that I had was, is there a scale of this narcissism? Do you get what I mean? Like, is it like, the picture that you painted is quite intense, but is there like a light version which is manageable? What is there a scale? Is what I want to know.
It's a fantastic question. In fact, I maybe should have mentioned this in the presentation. So narcissism in and of itself is a spectrum, without a doubt. In fact, having some level of narcissism is healthy for survival purposes. It's intrinsic in us all to have some level of narcissism. We've got, if I recall, there's a Harvard professor who's called Craig Malkin. Craig Malkin, Harvard professor on narcissism, discusses actually everyone needs some level of narcissism, in that you put yourself forward. Individuals that are too shy have too low narcissism, but there is a checklist, right? So there's something called the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, the NPI, and that's the kind of checklist which would determine if someone has the disorder. as opposed to just having some level of narcissism. So if you're bored, feel free to test yourself online. But good news if you are listening to this and thinking, oh my, am I a narcissist? Am I a psychopath? And you're a bit worried, holy moly, this is worrying. Good news for you. If you are genuinely thinking that, it's quite likely you are not somebody which is pathological narcissist or someone with NPD. Narcissists and psychopaths typically have limited introspection. They're incapable of recognizing that they are at fault for things. It's part of their defense mechanism. So in terms of answering your question, many people exhibit some level of narcissism. That in and of itself is not problematic. But once you delve into the realm of narcissistic personality disorder, it gets quite problematic, and it's very difficult to deal with these individuals. Typically, they will not improve. They do not improve. But certainly, there are maybe some which are a bit more manageable, some with narcissistic traits, as opposed to having a full-blown personality disorder. And to be clear, people at times do have these behaviors, and this is why we have to be careful and think about the phrase pathological narcissism. Pathological meaning it's they are consistently acting in this way, right? That's where the concern kicks in, is when you see these behaviors again and again and again, and you can see that you are developing some mental health issues as a result. Now, as scary as it is that there are many narcissists walking around on the world, or psychopaths, ultimately, so long as you don't have anyone close to you who's a psychopath or a narcissist, then you're kind of fine. Keep your boundaries. Make sure you have those strong boundaries, strong self-respect, and you should be fine in theory. But unfortunately, many people who have actually experienced narcissists before go on to be repeat abusers, because in psychology, often familiarity is what you look for in future relationships, as opposed to what is best for you and most healthy. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And I think it'll put a lot of our listeners' minds at ease. Throughout the conversation, the presentation rather, there's this notion, and I think we've heard it a lot of times as well, like on social media. You hear that this disorder is not treatable, or like the best thing to do is basically stay away, right? That doesn't sit well with me, because I feel like any issue that a human being has, there is a solution to it. I believe that God has created us with solutions, to the problems, right? We can't just have this case where it's like, no, you're a narcissist, you have this disorder, and that's it. Now that's the rest of your life, because basically that person's like a living, person that's condemned to hell, basically, right? Because if they can behave like that, very unlikely for them to make it to heaven. At least I hope so. But the way I'm looking at it is, and I said this to you as well before we had this podcast, was I want to look at possible solutions to this, because it's all well, it's all well and good saying that the problem exists, but I just feel like there has to be a solution. So can you shed some light as to what the potential treatments or healing processes for this disorder are?
So firstly, I'd like to make a point quite clear here. This conversation has a strong shock factor. It may make you think and start reevaluating all of your relationships. Who do I know that might be a narcissist? Who do I know that's a psychopath? And so on. I'd say be cautious of that. The way in which we discuss this topic was from the angle that we assume someone is a psychopath or narcissist, and then we have the discussion. So let's be very careful not to diagnose people. Let's be very careful not to kind of point fingers and so on. Why it's important to have this conversation is because there are individuals who are suffering from narcissistic abuse. And frankly, it's not about even diagnosing the abusers. It's actually about letting the victims recognize what they are going through. That's the most important lesson from the conversation around narcissistic abuse. And it's to empower them to understand how to resolve this issue themselves. Again, not to diagnose a narcissist or psychopath. And you typically won't be able to diagnose a narcissist and psychopath because they are often very covert, quite effective at avoiding authorities, and will, have no reason to, or seldom will have a reason to go for mental health support themselves. So I wanted to make that point quite clear. But if there's somebody who, say, is coming across this material, heavily immersed in the topic, is seeing an absurd level of correlation between these materials and an individual that they have been encountering quite closely in their life, then you might have a narcissist on your hands, and be careful. But to answer your question on solutions, I know individuals who are victims from a kind of minority ethnic background. And why that's relevant is because going no contact, which is the norm, the main solution that across the board therapists and survivors recommend, it's much more difficult for people of certain cultures to do so because of how intrinsic family or friends connections are. But really, the solution for a survivor is to still create as much distance as you need to ensure your mental health is strong. However far that is the solution. With regard to somebody who actually has a disorder now, not somebody where just we think might be a narcissist. If we know somebody is a narcissist, or they've very clearly exhibited all these traits pathologically and consistently, it is quite unfortunate that there is no remedy to solve this, and it's initially quite depressing as a conclusion, because for the obvious reason, this is one of the most profound things, profound impacts of believing in this topic of narcissism and psychopathy. Once somebody has experienced it, they completely reevaluate their understanding of humanity, frankly, maybe even religion, because you then realize there are people who have such low empathy and therefore are so interpersonally exploitative, they will do anything and destroy hundreds of people's lives just to do whatever benefits them. And to put it simply, these individuals on the extreme end are just pure evil. So one thing that I know survivors have found it very difficult to believe or comprehend is that because they are so kind-hearted, because they are so empathetic, because they don't want to believe that somebody could be hopeless. I think one of the biggest realizations is, yes, there are people who are just pure evil and they exist, and you will not really be able to change them, quite sadly.
Well, that's a tough pill to swallow, because even now, I'm almost feeling a bit sad for someone with this disorder, and I'm thinking to myself, if a person, for example, look, we're all aware of our negative traits, right? We're not all, but hopefully we are, right, to some degree at least. I would like to believe that there are narcissists out there aware of their manipulation, aware of their gaslighting, whether that comes in the form of exaggerating the truth or bending it, or kind of just accusing and all this kind of stuff, right? I'd like to believe that some of them know that they're going through it and that they're struggling with this, and it's something that they they don't want to be. And kind of hearing this kind of conclusion that, okay, there's no hope for them. I'm still not happy with that. If I'm going to be honest with you, like, I'm not happy with that. Because surely that you know, a narcissist like there exists like that, right? Like, they know that what they're doing is wrong. They know that, but they can't help it. They may feel compelled to behave that way. Based on your readings and stuff like that, does that case study exist?
So a case study in which they are aware, or that they are able
they're
to
aware
prevent
and
themselves acting?
Yeah, like both, right? So they're aware of it and they want to actively not be that.
Let's split that into two. In terms of a narcissist or psychopath being aware, unfortunately, rather than fortunately, they're very aware that they're abusing people. The distinction is they believe they're right to do it. And that's kind of where the grandiose sense of self comes from. That's where they believe they're superior to others, because if you were to, you know, hurt them ever so slightly, right, they have the right in their mind to destroy you and attack you 20 or 30 times as painful as you have hurt them, because in their mind, that's how much you hurt them. So are the narcissists and psychopaths aware of their abuse? Yes, they are. But they typically believe they are entitled to do it, that you deserve it. That's the thinking process that a narcissist exhibits when they are abusing you. Having said that, you may get some cases where it's on the lower side of the spectrum, and with therapy, the individual can try to minimize these behaviors, but because they are so fragile and weak, ironically, these are some of the most powerful people on earth, just for your reference, because they're internally so fragile and weak, it's almost only a matter of time until they need to be abusive again to feel good about themselves, right? There's a phrase called Schadenfreude, which is kind of pleasure from the pain of others. And narcissists, especially covert narcissists, exhibit this heavily, because their self-esteem is so low, and often these people appear to be hugely charming, by the way, and very confident individuals. But because their self-esteem is so low, they have to step on others to feel better, right? So this is one of the key traits. So it's almost only a matter of time. And I'll give a good example, actually. So there is a TikToker called Lee Hammock. And I would recommend anyone going through this to kind of flick through their TikToks for very useful short insights into narcissism and psychopathy. Lee Hammock is a diagnosed narcissist, right? Which you don't get too many of, because they don't like the idea of believing they have a disorder or an issue. He quite explicitly and quite helpfully for victims, as ironic as this sounds, explains just how much pleasure a narcissist gets from abusing people. It makes them feel good. It makes them feel great. And even though he's diagnosed, and even though he's going to a therapist consistently, he still can't help the fact he needs to be abusive every once in a while. And so even if you were to watch his videos, which again, he appears like such a lovely person, he has a few where he explains, you can never change me. I will always have this problem. I will consistently and always be abusive, and this is part of my nature. Lee Hammock's case is quite an interesting one, because his therapist essentially convinced him, as narcissists do, they need to excel in something, they need to be the best at things, right? It's part of one of the ways that they maintain their narcissistic supply. His therapist essentially convinced him to be the number one narcissist by exposing what narcissists do to their victims. So that's the reason why many victims have been fortunate, ironically enough, to get the closure they needed of the abuse from someone who finally admits what it is to be a narcissist. And for your reference, Lee Hammock is, again, probably one of the least sophisticated and is more of an overt narcissist than a covert narcissist. But still, that resource is there. Lee Hammock's a great example of that. You cannot, unfortunately, prevent those inhibitions that a narcissist has, and unfortunately, it's typically just a delayed response.
Where does narcissism come from? Like, is it genetic? Is it like something that can be developed over time? Is it something that, let's say, for example, okay, fine, let's say it can't leave someone, right? Someone can't stop being a narcissist, let's say, for example, or like at least when they're on the top tier spectrum. What's the stages of it, like in terms of development? Like, what are the early signals as well, like in childhood and stuff like that?
Yeah, fantastic question. So I think there's wide debate on this topic. I can't say very clearly what the correct answer is, but I'm leaning towards the nurture versus nature discussion. So it appears as though it's trauma related. So let's list out a few of the key possible causes. One is some kind of trauma in childhood, especially in the earlier years, or maybe the attachment years, first 4 or 5 years, whether the child was abused or heavily neglected. That's one. Trauma is always a big one. 2, they have a narcissistic parent, and that's almost quite often the case. When you have a narcissist psychopath, one of their parents or people very close to them would probably have those traits. 3 is actually almost being given excessive love and care from a parent in the younger ages as well, whereby the child does not outgrow the phase where they what you call maybe theory of mind, where you recognize that other people in the world essentially matter. There are others which experience the same things you do. So that these are some of the theories out there to explain the causes of narcissism or narcissistic personality disorder. There is a discussion about genetic predispositions. My impression of what I've read so far is it's heavily trauma related, and or they would have a parent who's narcissistic by background.
The topic of, and this is a tangent which we won't go down, but I've always been fascinated by the excessive love being a problem. So a little bit of personal kind of insight into this. So I grew up as a middle kid, feeling a bit neglected as a child. To be fair, like as in I've grown up from that phase now, and I realized I was loved appropriately. Thank you, mom and dad. But I kind of used that justification for some of my misbehavior in my teenage years, and I think a lot of us can relate to that, right? Like, as in it's a fairly typical thing to kind of do. But when I grew up, I started to obviously meet people beyond my council estate and beyond like the poverty circle, and I started seeing this thing of young adults that are messed up because their parents loved them too much. They put them on a pedestal too high. They gave them everything that they wanted. And I'm like, yo, what? Like, I didn't know that like the other extreme of neglect or like material neglect, let's call it, right, is excess can have like probably longer lasting damage. Because almost like when you come from a position of let's say material neglect, right? Like when you feel like, your parents didn't provide enough for you or whatever it might be, right? Resentment towards that because you're poor. You grow up and you realize that, oh, actually there's all these various factors that cause that. But when you kind of grow up with like a silver spoon in your mouth, right? And this like high level of praise and just like, the whole world revolves around you. Even when you grow up, you can't relate to the rest of the world. You can't experience the other aspect of it. Like there's no, it doesn't allow for empathy to exist in that space. Do you get what I mean? So I've always found that like a very, very fascinating thing. And one day I'd love to maybe just do a podcast specifically just on almost loving your children too much, like the excessive love. What are some of the things that parents could do to detect early on narcissistic behavior, and B, prevent these traits from developing into a full-blown kind of NPD?
Sure. I can't give a kind of medical or official answer to this. I can give my impressions. I would recommend anybody looking for those answers to kind of research with specialists with the medical background as well. Having said that, I think one point I'd want to make is you can never diagnose someone under 18 with narcissistic personality disorder, to my understanding. And part of that is because younger people in their teens and even late teens may exhibit some narcissistic traits. And that's part of growing up, frankly. When you're younger, you think the world does revolve around you a bit more than we do when we're adults. So you won't, when you've got a narcissist or maybe a psychopath, you'll see either extreme behaviors in those teen years, right? Or that they maintain similar behaviors, into their adult life, right? Their grown adult life. So that's just a point of information to be aware of. In terms of what parents can do, I can't say I know the answer to this, but what the material out there suggests is ultimately ensure there is unconditional love for your child, and be reasonably emotionally available, and maybe even materially available, but especially the unconditional love factor. That's probably the biggest one, and in line with what is understood in a lot of the psychological circles to be the most important and years for a child, the years where the attachment is formed, first 4 or 5 years or so. I think that's especially crucial for the parents to build a bond, to be emotionally available, to ensure there's unconditional love. And those would hopefully kind of help in that scenario. And this is a question I've been asking myself for a while. I mean, anybody who wants children would never want for this to happen to them. But that's my impression.
Thanks for that. I wanted to just kind of ask you a question on what you said about unconditional love, right? Because couldn't unconditional love be synonymous with that excessive love that we spoke about? I.e., a child is misbehaving, or a child is, let's say, when I say child, I'm thinking, let's say, for example, around the age between 11 and 13. I almost find like that those years are actually quite crucial and sometimes get overseen. But like when a child goes from that kind of, in that phase, now they're developing like their kind of more adult identity, right? Like towards when they get older, towards like 15 and stuff. Isn't unconditional love a little bit problematic in that context?
So let's be clear here. When we use the phrase unconditional love, it's referring to loving your child for who they are as a person, rather than their, let's say, achievements, which a narcissist typically is how they view their children. They view them as ways to get supply, and it's purely dependent on what you've achieved and how you've behaved in line with what the parent wants in a prescriptive manner. What is more correct is an unconditional love, in that you show love to the child for who they are. But a big part of that, if you truly love your child, you would not smother them to the degree that when they act poorly, you would endorse their behavior. And in fact, correctly so, that is, if you do not teach your children to respect others and respect boundaries and know what's right or wrong, they can very well become tyrants. That's part and parcel of this excessive smothering. So it's that's focusing on the semantics, but true unconditional love is just making sure you're emotionally available and caring for your child, whilst ensuring there are rules that they adhere to so they can be socialized into society, become respectful of others, and so on, and recognize the needs of others in society. It's that combination that would probably help avoid a scenario like this.
Last question. Now, we live in families, right? And that's not just Muslims. It's not just like brown people. That's the reality of life. We grow up in families. Now, the thing about no contact, right? Like as a solution to dealing with a narcissist, if you have a narcissistic parent, for example, that's not someone that you can, no contact, right? At least for like the most part of your life when you're young. Maybe when you become an adult, you move out, fine, you can do that, right? And that's reasonable, right? Even from an Islamic perspective, that if a parent is, becoming a hindrance to your spiritual well-being, it's reasonable to have a safe distance from them. Not like being disrespectful to them, but like maintain a distance from them. But then there's other relationships, like, for example, your children, or, for example, your spouse, right? And these are relationships that no matter how old you are, you can't really escape from unless you break away from the family, unless you actually, settle for divorce or decide to live apart or whatever it might be. Now, in that situation, what does one do?
Yeah. So I would be cautious to give blanket advice on this, because it's very specific to your, say, narcissist, your environment, the extent to which it's impacting your mental health and your life. And my advice would be, do as much as you can to get the best of both, which is maintaining the mental health, maybe creating enough distance, but not fully excluding yourself. But that's something you'd have to decide what your appetite is and to what degree the relationship is impacting you or important to you. So I'd like to give a small anecdote. So Robert Hare, who is the father of the psychopathy checklist, essentially the tool used to diagnose psychopaths. So you can imagine this individual really knows his stuff on psychopathy, right? So he himself has had times where he sat down with diagnosed psychopaths, often they are not, and he's talking to this diagnosed psychopath. And after a few of its sessions, even he admits he gets manipulated by the psychopath. I mean, if Robert Hare isn't able to protect himself for a psychopath or a narcissist, there's not really any chance for anyone else to. So depending on the severity of the individual you're dealing with, you may very well have to make some decisions which you did not want to make. I won't say I condone that, but I can empathize with people having to make these very difficult decisions. There wasn't another example that I actually came across speaking to someone else. There was a woman who, and no judgments here, because I don't know what their situation was. She had a newborn child, maybe 1-2 years old, with a narcissist. And at that stage, 1-2 years old, she recognized who the individual was. And, this is a mother. There is, you could make the argument that a mother is maybe more intuitively connected to the child. You've spent 9 months of, your body, your energy, your nutrients, your resources. You've dedicated purely to this living entity, which you then give birth to, a very difficult process. So you've given a lot really to sacrifice of yourself for the creation of that individual. And this woman went no contact to the degree that she basically abandoned her son because of just how powerful the narcissist that they were dealing with was, that they would destroy their psychology so much that they would actually sacrifice their own son and leave. So I really wish that's not the case for anyone that's going through it. But what I would recommend, if one feels they need to make some tough decisions here, is to create space. So this is a softer version of no contact. So you need to create safe spaces, whether that's physical and or mental, where if the abuse increases, you can kind of revert to the safe spaces. And so once if the abuse is reduced or minimalized, or the person's behavior improves and enhances, you can re-engage with them and build a relationship. But at least that way you have somewhere, a place of sanctity to resort to, right? You don't want to be trapped. You need to create these safe spaces. And then try your best to manage the individual, try your best to not completely cut off. And I would always recommend that before going no contact. But in extreme cases, you may have to kind of set up a new life almost.
I don't really know how to end this podcast or this conversation.
I've got an interesting ending. I was speaking to a friend of mine who has an awareness of this topic, has actually a relative who's gone through it. And they told me, quite interestingly, the realization of the existence of narcissists and psychopaths gave them more faith in humanity. Why? Because now you trace it back, you could make a pretty strong argument that the majority, if not the vast majority, of some of the most heinous crimes that we've seen committed by humans or by individuals that exhibited narcissistic or psychopathic traits. And so, in a sense, it gives you that faith that actually, with the exception of these people with these disorders, which are quite unfortunately evil, actually, those which are the average human aren't so bad after all. And there's actually a lot more hope for those individuals that don't have, say, this disorder.
I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I guess you gotta you can't find the silver lining to some degree. But no, I understand that. And for our listeners, I hope this conversation's been helpful. Hopefully it's shed some deep light onto the subject matter. Mohammed, I'd like to thank you for your time. I know this has been a very long podcast. You've brilliantly presented a very, very deep insight into this. And I think it's very important because, you know, terms like narcissism and gaslighting and all of this stuff, you just see it flying around Instagram and social media just like nonstop. But there isn't like, you know, at least I haven't come across like a deep body of content such as this podcast or a presentation where, you know, someone provides that kind of clear, deep insight into it. So thank you so much for your time. If you have any last words of advice, please feel free to share that with us.
Thank you very much, Hasib. It's been a pleasure to be able to share these insights with the viewers and listeners of TMV. And, you know, on a personal basis, as we know, this topic is quite controversial and requires a fair bit of anonymity and privacy for anyone involved. But if there are, in extreme cases, individuals that feel like they want to get in touch to kind of get some of that validation, possibly from myself, that might be something that we can try and help with. But you know, last pieces of advice I would say is pay attention, and most importantly, trust your intuition. In fact, that is the best way to determine what is right or wrong for you when you interact with people. Trust your intuition, and hopefully all will be well. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much, Hasib.
You're welcome, Mohammed. If there's any links that you can provide actually towards any like helplines or forums for people that are experiencing this, I think that could be quite useful as well. So if you send those to me, then I'll include those in the description for this podcast. But thank you very much, Mohammed. Again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So that was quite an intense podcast for myself personally, especially the kind of idea of there not being a solution per se for someone that is struggling with narcissistic personality disorder. So there's twofold, right? Because obviously you've got the situation where the person themselves is the narcissist, and I almost have a sense of empathy towards them, right? Because it's very possible that they would be in that situation trying to resolve it or aware, and they may not want to be that way. And I'm not comfortable with the idea of just condemning someone as evil and going to hell. That being said, Allah guides us all, and He tests us all individually. So what might be going through their mind and what might be right and wrong for them might be slightly different to us. Whilst we don't necessarily have the issue of not wanting to hurt other people, we may not necessarily face that as a daily challenge to not manipulate other people. For them it is. So on a day, for example, where they don't manipulate someone else or they don't hurt someone else, maybe Allah accepts that as an effort from them towards trying to be a better person. If you have any questions about narcissism, or if this podcast has potentially unraveled something, maybe a close family member, maybe a friend of yours you might feel have these issues. Obviously we discussed the advice in terms of not approaching them with this information, and we discussed what measures you could take to create that distance to be able to manage your own mental health if it is affecting you. If you have any questions about this though, and you want to reach out to Mohammed, then feel free to drop me an email. I've left a link for my email in the description below, and inshallah we can touch base. I can put you in touch with Mohammed, and we can hopefully figure this out together. That's it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. I definitely did. I feel like it was something that has really opened my eyes up to on a whole another level, really. And inshallah, we pray for everyone's mental health. We pray for everyone to, inshallah, raise children that are away from such, I don't even want to call it a defect, a disorder, I don't know. But, let's just pray that Allah protects us from such things and keeps us empathetic, keeps us kind, and keeps us genuine in the pursuit of His path. Ameen. That's it from me, guys. Assalamu alaikum. Barakallah feek. See you next week.